Earthshaker, a Fire Heart story. Written by Juliana Haygert. Read for you by Candace, Joice. A note from the author. Even though this book is a standalone, it is part of a larger series called the Fire Heart Chronicles. For your best enjoyment, please read it between Flamecaster and Sorrowbringer, Books 2 and 3. Chapter 1. We had never seen so many of them in one place. The animals lay on the forest floor, in the harsh grass and against rough tree trunks. Like this, sprawled out and half sleeping, they looked harmless, like oversized teddy bears. But their peaceful looks didn't fool me. These animals were different in their behavior, their power, and their appearance. Their fur was pure white, and when the sun struck just right, it shimmered like a beautiful iridescent pearl, and magic flowed through their veins, magic more powerful than even mine. From here, crouched down behind bushes and trees atop a short hill, I could feel their power. It swelled up, washing over me like a wave, pressing me back like a thick wall, pushing against my magic. So powerful. That was why they weren't safe here. Their hunters, our hunters, were coming, and I was here to stop them. "This is unusual," Marco, my brother, said beside me. "The most we've seen were what? 2? 3? 3. Duke, my cousin, whispered. I had been with them then, but I remembered seeing only 2 in the cages back at our Enclave. The other one had gotten away and had been captured by our enemies. "We'll need to call for help." I fished my cell phone from my pocket. Duke put a hand on my arm. "There's no time for that, Cora. If the alchemists are in the area, we need to do this now." I looked down at the clueless animals. 2 lions, 3 wolves, 1 fox, 2 rabbits, and more. There were 13 of them, and the most amazing thing was that they were sleeping close together, as if the rabbits weren't afraid of the wolves eating them. That was one of the fantastic things about heart animals. They were few and spread out, but when they came together, they didn't behave like the natural food chain applied to them, because it didn't. "We need to go," my brother said. "Now." He was right. I knew that, but I sent a text to our father. Better safe than sorry. "I'll let Wes, Nico, and Hansi know we're ready." Duke closed his eyes and used his powers. His special gift was telepathy. He said just to say when. On the horizon, the first orange rays of light peeked out. My brother looked at me. I nodded. Then he turned to Duke. "When?" I stood and stretched my arms in front of me. I channeled my power and called to the earth. The ground shook for a moment, and then walls sprouted from the ground, surrounding the animals. The lions woke up with loud roars. The wolves scratched at the rising wall. The bunnies tried to jump over. My wall wouldn't last long once the animals decided to use their magic to escape. "Go!" I barked. Marco and Duke sprang into action. On the other side of the valley, the brothers Wes and Nico appeared first, followed by their cousin Hansi. The 3 of them advanced toward the animals as well. The bunnies stood on top of my wall. Hansi sent a powerful rush of wind toward them, making them fall off the top of the wall. The animals rammed their cage. I grunted against the force. "Do it now!" I yelled. With another rush of wind, Hansi sent our warriors to the top of the wall. My brother got the darts from his pocket. He opened his hand, palm up, and the darts flew toward the animals. Sensing it was coming, the animals scattered around their temporary prison. Usually the darts hit most animals, but some, like the lions and wolves, needed more than one to go to sleep. From here, I couldn't tell what was happening, though I felt their heavy, desperate footsteps on the ground and their bodies slamming against my wall, looking for an exit. Then it happened. Surrounded by magic, one of them ran into the wall and it broke. I staggered back, gawking at the huge white lion that emerged from the other side. It looked at me and bared its sharp teeth in a low growl. Shit. I channeled my power, ready to throw rock bullets at the lion, not to kill, but to hurt enough to make him stay away from me, or to make a massive wall with me on top. The lion took one step toward me. I raised my hand, and something slammed into me from the side, throwing me down and pinning me to the ground. I looked up at a figure with a shaved head, dark eyes, pale skin, and a mask covering the lower half of his face. An alchemist. I yelled and called on the earth. Rocks the size of my fist slammed into the alchemist's head. Grunting, he raised his hands to protect himself, letting go of my arms. I kept sending rock after rock at him while I pushed him away and scrambled to my feet. I looked up and gasped. There were alchemists everywhere. My brother was fighting 3 at the same time. The others weren't faring any better. Even the animals were now fighting the alchemists. We were screwed. In my shock, my magic faded and the alchemist rose. A shadow appeared in his hand, forming a long line. The shadow solidified, becoming a sharp blade. Thankfully, I hadn't had many encounters with alchemists in my 18 years, but I had felt the sharp sting of their daggers before, and I had learned they were skilled fighters. He lunged at me. I stomped my foot on the ground. The earth moved. A rectangle jutted out in a diagonal path, hitting the alchemist hard and fast in the stomach. The man stumbled backward, a hand hovering over his middle. "You insolent bitch," he snarled. I loved it when they called me names. The alchemist grabbed a vial from the thick belt around his waist. He threw it at me. I knew better than to stand there, so I jumped back, trying to avoid whatever was in that vial. He threw another vial, and another vial, and another. I kept moving backward, away from the rest of the fight. We were in my playfield, and I wouldn't lose to this guy. I stomped my foot on the ground. It shook before a hole appeared right under the alchemist. With a surprised scream, the man fell inside the hole. I stomped the ground again, and the hole tightened around him, leaving only his head visible. Without help and the necessary tools, this alchemist was down for the count. I raced back to the fight. My brother had 2 opponents now, but he was limping, and blood trickled down his left leg. Duke and Hansi were still fighting. Wesh and Nico were nowhere to be seen. The animals fought too, though I could see a fox and a rabbit down. Gritting my teeth, I raced into the fight. In front of me, 5 alchemists fought a lion and a wolf. Rocks flew in front of me, hitting the alchemists fast. The men turned toward me. The lion clawed one of the alchemists in the back, sending the man to the ground, never to get up. The wolf closed its jaws around an alchemist's neck, taking him down, and the third one raised his arms to shield himself from my rocks. With a snarl, he extended one arm and summoned his shadow dagger. He threw it at me. I moved, but not fast enough. The dagger pierced my shoulder, pain exploded, and I let out a howl as I fell to my knees, gripping my shoulder. "Cora!" my brother screamed. Pain spread. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, wrapped my hand around the shadow dagger. It stung to the touch, and pulled it out. I gasped when it was gone, but the pain reared. I took another lungful of air and stood. The last two alchemists had taken advantage of the distraction and killed the wolf. They had the limping lion cornered now. The alchemists took their time, raising their daggers and taunting the poor, hurt animal. My anger spiked. I opened my hand, and rocks floated to me. They melded together, forming a long lance. Before they knew what was happening, I threw the lance at one of the alchemists. The man dropped to his knees, the blade jutting out through his chest. I called the lance, and it flew back to me. I held it as the other alchemist turned to me, his shadow dagger raised. He came at me. I shortened my lance, creating a sword, though I didn't play fair. What was the advantage of having incredible powers if I didn't use them? I stomped the ground, and 4 walls rose up to the alchemist's chest, caging him in. Then I pushed my rock sword into his chest. I dropped my hands and stepped back, shocked. I had been in a few fights with alchemists before, but I had never killed any. That was my brother's or my father's or any other warrior's business, and I had just killed 2. My first kills. I looked down at my hands, which suddenly seemed foreign to me, and I stepped back again, right into something.
Gotcha!
A shrill voice whispered in my ear. Arms closed around me, and a shadow dagger appeared in front of my chest. The alchemist poised the tip of the sword right over my heart. I sucked in a sharp breath and forced my brain to think. Then the lion was in front of us, bleeding and hurt, but still menacing. It growled. The alchemist pointed his dagger at the lion.
You die first.
The alchemist shifted me to his side, his grip still tight, and advanced on the lion. I called on the earth. The ground moved, and shackles appeared around the alchemist's feet, linking him to the ground, and around his wrists. He let go of the shadow dagger, and it disappeared before it could hit the ground. With a roar, the lion jumped on the alchemist. I turned my face, not wanting that image locked in my memory. I glanced around. The battle had faded. Most of the alchemists were down, and the few that were still alive were under the watchful eyes of Hansi. My brother and Duke rounded up the animals, the ones that had survived the attack. Its jaw stained by blood, the white lion stood by my side, watching the field where a massacre had just happened. The other lion was right in the middle, unmoving. I rested my hand on the lion's head. I'm sorry. The lion let out a sharp growl, then marched to the other side of the valley where the truck was parked. My brother readied a dart, but it wasn't necessary. The lion marched past him and into the back of the truck. My brother stared at the lion with wide eyes. Duke shrugged, also surprised. After the lion stepped into one of the cages, my brother looked from Duke to me. Where are Wesh and Nico? I haven't seen them since the middle of the fight, I said, glancing around. I'll try contacting them. Duke closed his eyes and called for them in his mind. After a moment, he opened his eyes again. They aren't answering. A knot appeared between my brother's brows. Do you always feel a person's mind, even when they are sleeping? Duke paled. Yes, I can feel the presence of a person's mind even when I'm not allowed in. He paused. Even when they are sleeping. I gasped. Are you saying you can't feel them? He nodded. My brother picked up his sword and rushed toward the last 3 alchemists. Tied with special ropes, they were kneeling in front of Hansi, who kept a strong wind revolving around them like a barrier. "Where are our friends?" he shouted, pushing the tip of his blade into the alchemist's neck. The alchemist didn't say anything. He didn't move or blink or even breathe. These men were trained to remain cool the entire time, which was annoying. "I'll repeat once more." Marco pressed the sword farther. A tiny red spot appeared at the alchemist's exposed neck. "Where are our friends?" The man said nothing. With a growl, my brother slashed the man's neck. I turned my face away and only heard the dull thud of the man's body hitting the ground. "Did you see what I did to your friend?" Marco put his blade next to the alchemist's throat. "Start talking." The alchemist could have passed as a statue. My brother yelled his questions once more to no avail. He killed the man and moved on to the 3rd and final alchemist. "Marco," Hansi started. Marco turned enraged eyes to Hansi. "He won't say anything. Not here, not now. You know that. Better take him with us and try later." "That might be too late," Marco muttered. "It's the only chance we have," Hansi said. Duke put a hand on Marco's shoulder. "Hansi and Cora will drive the animals and the alchemist home, while you and I stay and look for Welsh and Nico, okay?" "No way," Hansi protested. "They are my cousins. I want to search for them myself." "I want to stay too," I said. Duke shook his head. "Marco and I are the strongest of the warriors. We'll go search and you two go home." Marco turned his red rage eyes to me. "Don't even think about disobeying my orders, Cora. You and Hansi make sure this vermin is locked away properly and take care of the animals. We'll be there soon." He used his commander voice, loud and resolute. My brother was the warrior's leader, and I was one of the youngest recruits and the only girl. I had to listen to him and do what he told me to, or, according to our father, I would be out of the warrior group faster than I could blink. I sighed. "Okay." A flash of relief crossed his face. Marco and Hansi carried the alchemist to the truck and locked him in one of the reinforced cages. Then he halted in front of me. I reached for him and held his hand. "Don't take too long." "We won't." He squeezed my hand. "Now go." He nodded to Duke, and the 2 of them ran off, disappearing between the trees. I let out a long breath. Good luck. Chapter 2. As Z-gangs, we couldn't live with Gajos or regular Romney because we had real magic and we were hunted. We were stronger together and hidden, which was why we lived in enclaves. Our enclave was small. We had only 98 Z-gangs living there, but it was one of the most beautiful enclaves I had ever seen. Not that I had seen many enclaves, but I couldn't imagine a more charming place. It was deep in the forests of Maine, near the border with Canada, surrounded by golden horehound, a golden shrub that obscured our power and made it hard for anyone to locate us. The houses, white or beige with terracotta roofs, stretched over a hill. Wide stone paths wound around the houses, leading to the hill's top where the main square was located, a large open area with stone benches and a small fountain. Across the main square were the administrative buildings, the elders' council room, the Rumbaro's meeting room, the prison, the infirmary, the school. Hansi drove the truck through the back gates. My father and Danior, his brother and the Enclave's Rumbaro, were waiting for us when we arrived. They stared at the truck, worry stamped in their eyes. "What happened?" my father asked. "Where are the others?" I hopped out of the truck. "We were attacked, Dot." My father's eyes ran from my head down to my toes and back. Then he saw the thick blood already drying on my shoulder. He clutched my arm, hovering over me like a mother hen. "How bad was it?" "We caught them," I said, my voice low. "We have one of them in a cage. We're hoping someone can make him talk." Alchemists talked a lot, but only when they had the advantage. Under pressure or torture, it had never happened before. The Rumbaro sucked in a sharp breath. "And?" "Wesh and Nico disappeared," Hansi continued, voicing what I was afraid to. "Marco and Duke stayed to look for them." My father and Danior exchanged an intense look. "They are the best," my father said. He could try to fool us, but I could see the tension in his thick neck. He was nervous for his son. "If anyone can find Wesh and Nico, it's them." "You're right. Let's give them a couple of hours. If they aren't back by noon, we send another team after them." Danior straightened his back. "Now let's get these animals settled." I glanced at the building behind us. The place looked like a prison. It even felt like a prison, but it wasn't. If I squinted, I could pretend it was a stable with 6 large stalls on each side, with reinforced walls, thick metal bars, no windows, and big doors which were watched day and night. These were built to hold the animals until we could take them to the sanctuary, a hidden place in northern Canada. It was a temporary condition, the safest place for them right now. It still looked like a prison, though. It didn't take long to guide the animals from the truck to their cages, especially the white lion, who had growled when we tried to catch him and simply walked to the cage by himself, much like he had done before. Everyone looked as stunned as I felt by the lion's lack of resistance. While Hansi, my father, and I made sure the animals had food and water, Danior called on the other warriors. "Take the alchemist away," he instructed. Armed to the teeth and with their magic at their fingertips, the warriors escorted the alchemist to the real prison. Danior accompanied them. After they were gone and all the animals were settled, I halted in front of the white lion's cage. He had lost his mate. Lots of animals had died today. My father came to my side. "You should take care of that wound." "I will later." Now that the adrenaline was fading, the pain stung more and more. "We need a plan to take these animals to the sanctuary soon. Having too many here is dangerous." I looked at my father. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a long beard, but warm and kind brown eyes. "They've already suffered too much. They need a safe place." "I know." My father rested a heavy hand on my upper back. "But right now, here is the safest place for them." My phone dinged. I fished it from my pocket and read the message. "Marco." "We're back. Going to the infirmary." I gasped. "Marco is back." Hansi stayed with the animals while my father and I raced to the infirmary on the other side of the Enclave. When we arrived, the lobby was empty. I counted 2 minutes while I looked from the front door to the archway that led to the back room. Marco was coming to the infirmary, or he was already being treated in the back room. With a grunt, my father started walking toward the back room. I held his arm. "No, wait a little longer." Then Marco and Duke emerged from the archway. Like my father had done to me, I ran my eyes over them to make sure they were okay. A long, relieved sigh escaped me when I noticed they didn't look any worse than the last time I had seen them. My father approached them and clasped their upper arms. "What happened?" Danyor burst into the infirmary and rushed to his son. "Are you two okay?" Duke nodded. "We are." My father frowned. "But?" "Wesh is in the back," my brother said. "He was beaten up pretty bad, but he'll be okay." Silence. "And Nico?" I asked. Duke's eyes flickered before he answered. "Wesh said the alchemists took him." "By Saint Sarah luckily." Danyor paced from side to side. "We'll send another team to look for him, and Dot," Duke interrupted him. "We know what happens when an alchemist takes a Zigane." My father stepped forward and clasped his brother's shoulders. "Danyor, there's nothing we can do now. The alchemists don't—" "I don't care," Danyor barked. I flinched from the fury and frustration irradiating from his body. "I won't let another one of us succumb to the evil machinations of these pests. If we are quick enough, we can find him and we can save him." After a last hard look between brothers, Danyor marched out of the infirmary. I watched as the door slammed closed after him. I got why he was frustrated, why we were all frustrated. So many times we had tried to save Ziganes in time, to no avail. 2 years ago, the warriors were out on a mission to find a heart flower, the rare flower that gave us our powers, when they were attacked by a large group of alchemists. Douglas, Danyor's oldest son, was captured. A couple of days later, the warriors found his body abandoned on the side of a road, beaten, broken, with thousands of cuts, bloodless, and missing several body parts. No one had ever come back from being kidnapped by alchemists. As far as we knew, they killed us right after and then harvested our blood and specific body parts, eyes, ears, tongue, nails, and heart. It seemed like a gruesome death, one no one deserved. The healer emerged from the back room, a washcloth in her damp hands. "How is he, Roma?" my father asked, looking at the healer. Roma sighed. Whenever she was tired or aggravated, the wrinkles around her eyes and neck seemed more pronounced. "He was beaten pretty badly. He might have a concussion, so I would like to keep him overnight for observation. Other than that, he has a broken arm and several purpling bruises, but he should be fine." "Is he awake?" Marco asked. Roma shook her head. "I gave him something strong for the pain. He'll be out for a couple of hours." My father grunted. "We'll talk to him later, then." Silence filled the room while Roma continued to pat at her hands with the washcloth. Then Duke looked up at my father. "I should go talk to my father." My father nodded in agreement. Duke left the infirmary. On instinct, Marco took a step to follow Duke, but stopped and looked at our father. "I can help him." "I know." My father nodded. "You can go. Danyor might listen to the two of you." Marco glanced at me, then put his fist over his chest and bowed to our father. "Sostimos, Dot." Then my father turned to me. His eyes were heavy with emotion. He offered me a small smile. "And you're getting close to being a great warrior like your brother and cousin." "I better be, after all the training you and the guys put me through," I said in a teasing tone, trying to lighten the mood. But it was true. Since I was young, I had shown no interest in what the other girls had. First dolls, then makeup and dancing, then knitting and other domestic activities. All I ever wanted was to be a great warrior like my father and his brother and my brother and cousins. My mother detested it, but my father thought it was the best idea anyone had ever had. A girl warrior? He helped me prove it was possible, and now I was one of the best. And at only 18 years old, I was one of the youngest. He nodded. Now, O great warrior, let Roma take care of you. At my father's words, the pain flared up, and I hissed. I had almost forgotten. With a small smile, Roma put her hand around my waist and tugged me forward.
Don't worry, I'll make you all better.
Chapter 3.
Here.
My mother, Daj in Zigain, walked into my room and pivoted me toward the tall mirror behind my closet door.
These will look great on you.
She held up 2 big golden hoops to my ears.
What you think?
I looked at her from the mirror. She was so beautiful and young, she could have been my sister. Zigains who came to visit from other enclaves often thought that, especially since we both looked so much alike. Long, straight dark hair, tanned skin, a thin face with high cheekbones, full pink lips, and hazel eyes. I smiled. I like it.
Great.
She placed the earrings in my hands.
They will look pretty with your outfit.
I glanced at myself in the mirror. For special occasions, I gave up my warrior's clothes for regular Zigain clothing, a long flowy skirt and a beautiful blouse and lots of jewelry. My mother was thrilled. You're enjoying this too much, I told her. She shrugged.
Yes, I am. You're always wearing pants. What Zigain woman wears pants?
One who is a warrior. She scrunched her nose.
You know how I feel about that.
And you know I don't care. I like being a warrior. It's my choice. She sighed.
And that's exactly why I never tried stopping you.
She smiled at me through the mirror again.
All right, I'll be going to the main square now to help with last-minute things.
She retreated.
You'll be there soon, right?
Yes, Dash, I will. She waved at me, then disappeared out the door. I glanced at myself once more in the mirror. Like this, if I ignored the aching of the wound on my shoulder and the bandage beneath my clothes, I looked like the other girls from the Enclave. Pretty, feminine, delicate. Why couldn't I be pretty, feminine, delicate, and strong? My father, my brother, and most of the warriors seemed to accept that. Even my mother seemed to have come to terms with it. The rest of the Enclave, however, didn't think like them. Who cared? I didn't owe them any explanation. With a sigh, I walked away from the mirror and out of my house. The streets were busier than usual, with people coming and going, getting ready for the big banquet. I didn't feel like celebrating when we had just lost Nico and Wesh was still hurt. In the end, Wesh had slept all day and all night. It was early this morning when he was well enough to talk, but none of the information he told us was useful. I don't recall much, he had said, his voice weak. Sitting up on one of the stretchers in the back room of the infirmary, he looked like shit. The left side of his face was swollen and purple, and there was another purple bruise peeking out from the neckline of his shirt. His left arm was bandaged. We were going to take him into the nearest town, 40 miles away, to get a cast. They were too many, and they moved too fast. And they had Nico. His lower lip quivered. I fought. I tried fighting until I couldn't anymore. He glanced up at my brother and Duke, who were standing by his bed. I had given up fighting when you two found me. It was a miracle that Marco and Duke had found Wesh. one that wouldn't be overlooked. As my father usually said, life went on. Once Wesh was well, we would honor Nico by celebrating him, and then we would celebrate Wesh for making it. But for now, we continued with our traditions, and every Friday evening, our Enclave held a banquet for everyone in the main square. Feeling unusually lazy, I started my walk toward the main square. A minute later, Charity and Yana walked past me, casting glances my way. I rolled my eyes, trying hard not to bark insults at them. Charity was considered the most beautiful young woman in our Enclave. She had been betrothed since she was a little girl, but it was no secret a lot of the men would love to marry her, and Yana was a close second. They were everything a Zigane woman should be, pretty, feminine, and delicate. They knew how to cook, clean, knit. They were taught to take care of a house, husband, and kids. While they learned all that, I trained with my father and brother so one day I could prove my worth and join the warriors. I didn't regret any of it. While I walked up the path leading to the main square, Marco appeared on my right and Duke on my left. They matched my slow stride. I was in no rush to get to the celebration. "Don't let them get to you," my brother said. "You're way more beautiful than they will ever be," Duke said. I slapped his shoulder. "Don't tease me." "Ouch." He recoiled, a hand over his shoulder. "I'm not teasing you. It's the truth." "He's right, you know," my brother said. "They look at you like that because they are jealous. You're more beautiful than they are, and you can fight as well as we can. It's a powerful combination." I groaned. One that is looked down on in this Enclave. Duke bumped his shoulder on mine. "Who cares? We appreciate it, and they will learn to do the same. You'll see." "Speaking of which," Marco started. Duke shot him a glare. I looked from Duke to Marco. "What?" "I probably shouldn't say anything, but we heard rumors," my brother said. "About?" "Rye is going to ask Dot for your hand tonight." My heart skipped a beat. I stopped dead in my tracks. "What?" Marco showed me a lopsided grin. "Exactly. I told Dot you wouldn't want it. He'll probably respect your wishes." I had never thought about it. I had never considered someone asking for my hand. At 18, I was already deemed left behind. Didn't I want it? I didn't know. And Rye, he was a great warrior. I had heard different rumors. One of them was that Rye was preparing to challenge Duke for the warriors' leadership. And to be honest, if Duke and Rye fought, I didn't know who would win. But to ask for my hand? I didn't believe that. Rye had lost his betrothed when she was still in her early teens, and even though he had been young too, the other rumor I heard was about how much he hurt from losing her. So much, he wasn't ready to choose a new fiancé and probably never would. "Don't worry," Duke said, his tone firm. "Just say the word, and we won't let it happen." I stared at him, my throat dry, my thoughts too fast to process. "Wait." A furrow appeared in between my brother's brows. "You're considering it?" Was I? I wasn't sure. No, not considering, because to consider something I would have to understand it, to process it first, and right now I was lost. "There you guys are." Hansi stepped in front of us, saving me from saying anything. "The party's about to start." He stepped between us and hooked his arm over Duke's shoulders. "Let's go grab some beer." Marco shot me a look that said we would talk later, but I dismissed him. The guys walked into the square, and I fell behind, even though I was sure Hansi had meant to invite me too. Right now, I needed time to think. Alone. I stepped into the square and halted again. Long tables with food were being set up, musicians were positioning themselves beside the fountain, and dancers gathered around them. All the Ziganes of the Enclave milled about the square, talking and laughing and drinking, and soon eating and dancing. This might not be the best place to think or to be alone. I took a step back, intent on leaving this place and going back home. But then I stood my ground and lifted my chin. I was a warrior, and a damn good one at that. I wouldn't run from a square full of people or a silly rumor. And if in case I was completely wrong about Rye, I could simply kick his ass if the rumors ever came true. But within 2 minutes of walking around the square, my steps faltered and I halted once more. Across the crowd, Rye approached my father, who received him with a big smile and a firm handshake. My heart sped up, pounding against my ribs. No, it wasn't true. There had to be another explanation for why Rye was suddenly talking to my father as if they were best friends. Standing beside my father, the warrior turned around. While they spoke in what looked like a casual manner, Rye's vigilant eyes swept around the square. I shrunk beside a lamppost, hoping its shadow would make it harder to spot me. At that moment, I forgot about the busy square, about the loud people, the scent of the delicious food floating around, and I focused on one thing, as if I was getting ready to attack. I checked out Rye. Even though I saw him every single day, it was like I was actually seeing him for the first time. Before, he had just been another stoic warrior, training and going on missions alongside me. Now, I noticed how tall he was, just as tall as Marco and Duke, and how out of room his strong shoulders and arms seemed inside his dark red shirt. His usual wild, messy, dark golden hair was neatly combed back, and his sun-kissed skin shone golden under the sunlight. He looked as stoic and quiet and hard as always, and yet I had to admit it was the first time I realized he was cute. No, scratch that. Cute wasn't a strong enough word. Rye was handsome. My heart skipped a beat. Not 10 feet in front of me, my mother crossed my line of sight, carrying a vast tray overflowing with food. She hurried to a long table to my left, and together with other women, started organizing the food. I hurried to her side. "Dash, may I speak with you?" She smiled at me. "Of course." In private, please." Her usual smile faded. "Sure." My mother followed me to the edge of the square, where there were fewer people to hear us. She nodded her hands on her blouse and faced me. "You're making me nervous, Shay. What is it?" "I heard something." "About?" I pressed my lips tight. Deciding honesty was the best, I blurted, "Marco and Duke told me Rye is going to ask Dot for my hand." Her mouth made a little O as she looked out to where my father still talked with Rye. She returned her eyes to me, softer. "You weren't supposed to find out like that." I gasped, my heart squeezing. "So it's true." "It was Rye's Dot's idea," she said. "Rye lost his fiancée years ago, and you two are unpromised and getting older. You both need to marry soon." I cringed. If I was the lady who would grow old alone with a bunch of cats, Rye was the guy who would grow old with a horde of dogs. So that was why he was asking for my hand. Not because he liked me, but because we were getting old and alone. Having chosen the life of a warrior, I had never been the romantic type. But if I ever got married, I wanted it to be because the guy liked me and I liked him, not because of a situation. If that were the case, then I would rather grow old alone with my imaginary cats. What if I don't want to marry him? My mother narrowed her eyes, clearly not understanding my question.
What do you mean?
I mean, I still have 3 years until I'm of marrying age. We don't need to rush to find a fiancé for me.
But my dear, we've been trying to find a fiancé for you since you were a little girl, she said, as if that was a plain fact. We never stopped looking.
I gaped at her. And here I thought my parents had tried to find a match for me when I was a baby, like every family did, but had soon given up and never tried again. I had no words. The song of strings filled the air, and cheers erupted throughout the place. The band began playing an animated flamenco, and dancers took the center of the square. My mother patted my hand.
Look, here they come.
She turned to face the crowd. I followed her line of sight. Rai and my father crossed the square, coming toward us. I tensed, and even though I considered myself a fearless warrior, I felt like running. My father slid to my mother's side, taking her hand in his, and Rai stopped right in front of me, his intense dark brown eyes on mine. I gulped. "Hi, Cora," he said, his voice rough, rougher than I remembered. He extended his big hand to me. "Would you like to dance?" Chapter 4. No. The word was on the tip of my tongue. I opened my mouth to say it, but a sharp look from my father had me swallowing the word back. It went down scratching against me and settled in my stomach like a heavy weight. I sucked in a sharp breath. "Sure." I slid my hand in his. He closed his long fingers around my hand and pulled me to where couples and friends danced along to the flamenco song. Then he turned to me and placed his free hand on my waist. "Is this okay?" I glanced up at him. His face was sharper and more handsome up close. Again, I was surprised I hadn't noticed just how attractive he was before. To be honest, I had been so focused on making it as a female warrior, I hadn't looked at any of the male competition around me, not with the eyes of a lovesick girl. I was far from being lovesick right now, but there was something stirring deep in my gut, something I didn't know how to explain. A knot appeared between Rai's brows, and he withdrew his hand. "Something wrong?" I didn't need to look around to know a lot of the people in the square were now looking at us, probably starting new rumors about things they had no idea about. I inhaled deeply. What the hell? Why was I suddenly so quiet and self-conscious? That wasn't me. I lifted my chin and met his eyes. I would rather not be the center of attention right now. "Oh." His eyes did a quick scan. "I see. How about we go for a walk then?" I nodded. That would be better. Rai dropped my hand, but stayed by my side as we walked out of the square. Once more, I avoided looking out, but felt the sting of all the gazes on us. If alchemists had dropped from the skies, I would have faced them with no fear. But when my family and friends and our tight community were staring at my back and whispering, I wanted to hide. Once we walked onto a deserted street, I let out a long breath. Rai's shoulders relaxed,
and that was when I noticed he had been tense too. Damn, how many things hadn't I noticed? For a moment, we strolled side by side and in complete silence. My insides started twisting again. Why had he invited me to dance, then to walk, if he was just going to stay quiet? Deciding I was done being shocked about this situation, I halted. So, after another step, Rye stopped and turned to face me. So, I groaned on the inside. You're just going to pretend nothing is going on? He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up a little. I'm a little concerned that no matter what I say or do, you're just going to pull out your sword and bury me in the earth. That did sound like me, even if I wasn't feeling that bold and strong right now. Well, I promise I'll try not to. One corner of his lips tugged up, and it was hard not to stare. That half smile, it suited him. I'm sorry about the surprise, he finally said. To be honest, it all happened pretty fast. I crossed my arms, suddenly feeling like I had to protect myself from whatever he was going to tell me. What happened? His smile faded, and he let out a long breath. About a year after my fiancé died, my dot started bothering me about choosing another betrothed. Since I was old enough, he wanted my input, but I wasn't ready. I felt like I would never be ready. He paused. For a while, he stopped bothering me about it, but a few months ago, he started again. Then one night at dinner, he mentioned you would make a nice fiancé. I snorted, remembering when I started training with the warrior years ago, and how Rye's father was vocal about being against it. Your dot doesn't like me. I think he always liked you. He just thought differently about you being a warrior. That every woman should just bow her head to her husband and say, "Yes, sir." He frowned. Not quite. My Dodge isn't like that. She meets him head on, and he bends to her will often. In your case, I think he was just old school. No girl had joined the warriors, not here at least, and that went against everything we knew. So what changed? He shrugged. To be honest, I think he was tired of looking for someone else and not finding anyone available. I flinched. So, after getting over the fact that you're a warrior, and a great one, he suggested I proposed to you. I suppressed another flinch. I wouldn't let Rye or his father treat me as if I were a leftover. I didn't care if I had to live alone with my swords or my cats. You ignored his attempts to find a match for you for so long. Why do it now? Rye averted his eyes and shook his head once. A pang ran through my heart. He had come to me, and he was letting me down now? I didn't get it. It's okay, I said, hoping my voice didn't break. I'll say no. Your dot will have to scratch my name from your list, and you can go back to ignoring him while he looks for someone else. I took a step back, intent on walking away calmly. Holding my breath, I turned. A hand closed around my wrist and pulled me back. Frozen, I looked up as Rye loomed over me. I confess I had noticed you before. Since you started training with us, something about you drew me in. But, like everything else, I ignored it. Ever since my fiancé died, I ignored all the feelings I ever had. So after my dot suggested I propose to you, I realized I quite liked that idea, and I forced myself to face all the bottled feelings. He pressed his lips tight. It wasn't pretty, and it took a while, but I'm glad I did it. Rye slipped his hold from my wrist to my hand. Because once I was free of all that,
I was able to see you, really see you." His lopsided grin was back. "I noticed the way you fight, how strong and lithe and lethal you are. I noticed the way you smile at your brother and Duke, and the occasional laughter that lights up your entire face. I noticed how kind you are to the people around you, even when they are skeptical of a girl warrior. I noticed how beautiful you are, inside and out. I noticed how the more I looked at you, the more I wanted to look at you." He paused, his eyes searching mine, and my breath hitched. "I noticed I want to propose to you, and I want you to say yes." My mouth fell open, and my heart sped up. This man, so tall, so strong, so powerful, had practically spilled the sweetest words I had ever heard and practically proposed to me, and all I could do was stare at him. There were no words. I didn't know what to say to him. Rye tugged on my hand. "I know this is all fast, and I took you by surprise," he continued. "I understand if you need time to think." Yeah," I croaked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Yes, I wasn't expecting any of it." "I know." He dipped his chin once. "And you should know that when my parents talked to yours, they were pleased with the idea. They might try talking to you about it. Please, whatever they say, don't do this for them. If you say yes, don't do it for them. We're grown-ups. We don't need to please our parents. If you say yes, do it for you." Still not trusting any words that could come out of my mind, I nodded. "Perhaps we could spend some time together, get to know each other better." I couldn't imagine what we could do together, how we would spend our time together, but I nodded again. That's a good idea." A small smile took over his lips, brightening his sharp features, and my heart danced a little more in my chest. "Great. I won't bother you tonight any more then." He leaned over me, and I held my breath while he pressed his soft, warm lips to my cheek. "I'll talk to you tomorrow." Still smiling, he let go of my hand and walked away, back to the square and the party. I had no idea how long I stood there, watching the place he had been, my hand on my cheek and my breath coming in small hitches. What had happened here? Whatever it was, I needed to burn off some of the energy pulsing through me. I spun on my heels and headed to my house, where I changed into my training uniform, suede pants, thin tunic, and a vest. With my magic crackling under my skin, I marched to the training grounds. Chapter 5. In my dream, I was in the forest with Marco and Duke and the White Lion who had come to the Enclave with us. We were on a mission to find a heart flower. Our supply of the elixir was running low, and soon we would need more. The moment we found the flower, Rye showed up, knelt before me, and proposed. In shock, I started screaming. Then Marco was screaming, and Duke, and Rye. Even the lion roared with a piercing cry. My shoulders shook. "Cora!" I snapped my eyes open, and before I could make out my father's face looming over me, I registered the screams and shouts coming from outside. I sat up. "What's going on?" "The Enclave is under attack," he said, his voice thin. The air fled my lungs. "What?" "Alchemists broke in," he explained, grabbing my hand and pulling me from my bed with a hard tug. I stood there in shock. That wasn't possible. Alchemists couldn't get in. We had protection spells.
and the golden whorehound around the property. Warriors were stationed at the watchtowers at all times. Marco appeared in my doorway, strapping his weapons belt around his waist.
"Get ready. We're going after them."
He didn't need to tell me twice. I moved, reaching for my combat gear. My father caught my wrist.
"No."
I looked at him. "What do you mean?"
"Get dressed. Get your weapons. But I have another mission for you," he said, his tone solemn. "You will evacuate the heart animals."
"We won't need to evacuate if all the warriors go against the alchemists," I protested. "We can take them." My father shook his head.
"We don't know how many there are, how spread out they are, and until we do, we're not taking any chances. You'll evacuate the animals, and your Dodge and I will gather the kids and elderly and start evacuating them too, just in case."
I didn't like that. "And you?" I glanced at Marco. My mother stood beside him now, her face white with nerves and fear. "He's going with the other warriors, isn't he? This isn't fair. I want to go too." My father clasped both my arms and looked at me, his eyes intense.
"I'm giving you an equally important task. It's our duty to save those animals. For all we know, there are alchemists headed that way already, and I'm sending you there."
His grip tightened.
"Please don't argue with me."
I swallowed hard and dipped my chin in agreement. My brother offered me one of his cocky grins.
"Give them hell."
I tried smiling back, but something tugged inside me. "You too." Then he was gone. My father messed with his phone for 2 seconds. My phone beeped.
"I've sent you a contact from Belleville Enclave in Connecticut. I have friends there."
I didn't understand. "Why?"
"Just in case."
He squeezed my arms once more.
"Please, be safe."
"You too," I said again. He kissed the top of my head.
"See you soon, Shay."
He paused at the door to take my mother's hand in his. He looked back, a small smile on his lips. My mother waved at me before my father ushered her away. Fear burst from deep in my gut, threatening to choke me. I pushed it down and moved. I got dressed, grabbed my weapons, and left my house. All lamps on the streets were out, making it darker than usual. The loud shouts and clank of steel coming from the square, though, told me the alchemists were close. "Shit," I cursed. I turned the other way and ran, as light on my feet as I could, toward the stable. I rounded the last corner and stopped dead in my tracks. Someone was sneaking inside the building housing the animals. I pulled out my sword and channeled my magic. Ready, I tiptoed to the big double gate, and holding my breath, I pushed the gate open. Moonlight streamed inside, illuminating the intruder. "Hey!" Wesh yelped, paling upon seeing me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, lowering my sword. Hugging his broken arm, Wesh let out a long breath.
"You gave me quite the scare."
I gritted my teeth. "Answer me, Wesh, what are you doing here?"
"I was in the infirmary when the screams started. I heard the alchemists sneaking past the door. I couldn't just stay there. I left through the back door and ran from them. When I realized where I was close to the animals. I thought it was a good idea to hide in here."
I shook my head. "No hiding. I'm taking the animals." I walked past him toward the back gate.
"Wait, take them away? What do you mean?"
"Yes." I unlocked the gates and pushed them open. The truck was parked right there. "And since you're here, you're going to help me."
I grabbed the keys from the nail hanging on a pillar between the cages and threw them to Wesh. He caught it with his good hand. I'm going to open the truck. Start bringing them in. Heavy stomps came from outside the building, and I pulled out my sword again.
Hey, it's just me,
Rye said as he stepped into the darkness of the stable. I took 2 large steps toward him, then stopped. What are you doing here?
Your dot asked me to come help you.
In the darkness, I was glad he couldn't see the warmth that spread through my cheeks. Well, since you're here, help Wesh get the animals. I'm going to open the truck, I said again.
Okay,
was all he said before launching into action. As quickly and quietly as I could, I opened the truck's back doors and the cages, hoping it would speed things up. I wanted to turn on the headlights, but I was afraid their bright shine would draw attention. We were still under the alchemists' radar, and the longer we stayed that way, the better. Soon, Rye and Wesh brought the animals into the truck. And the white lion? I asked.
He won't let me get close,
Wesh said. Groaning, I grabbed the keys back from Wesh and marched to the stall holding the lion. He was sprawled in the back, seemingly sleeping, even with all the noise we were making. Hi, I said, feeling lame. I'm going to get in your stall, okay? I told the lion. I felt so stupid talking to a big cat who was clearly ignoring me. There are alchemists here. We need to go. You need to come with me, okay? I unlocked the stall and opened the door. Rye's hand shot out, closing around my wrist. I looked up at him. The moonlight streaming from the high windows created heavy shadows on his face, emphasizing the sharp angles of his jaw and chin.
Be careful,
he whispered. I nodded. He let go, but rested his hand on the hilt of his sword. I stepped inside the stall, and the lion lifted its huge head. I gulped, suddenly conscious that I was in a closed cage with a ferocious animal. Did you hear me? I know you can understand me. Alchemists are coming this way. I need to take you out of here. The lion laid his big head down on his front paws again.
I say give him 10 seconds, Rye said. If he doesn't come, let him be. Better to save the rest than to risk the safety of the others because of his stubbornness.
I knew he was right, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. I crouched down and said in a soft voice, Please, whatever made you come with us, act on that. We need to leave. Now. Loud and fast footfalls came from outside. I stood. The lion lifted his head, and Rye had his sword pointed to the front gates as it opened.
There you are,
Hansi said, stepping in.
I was looking all over for you.
He jerked his chin to Wesh.
I was sent by the Rumbero to get you out of the infirmary. When I got there and didn't find you...
He shook his head.
And how did you find me?
Wesh asked.
I was hiding from the alchemists,
Hansi replied. I stepped out from the lion's stall. How bad is it? Hansi's shoulders sagged.
Bad, really bad. There are dozens of them, or more, I don't know.
I cursed under my breath. Rye lowered his sword.
Since you're here, you're coming with us now.
He turned to me.
5 seconds, then we leave the lion behind.
Shit. The 3 men turned to the truck, and I faced the lion, who, to my surprise, was now standing on 4 legs. I opened my mouth to say another stupid thing, but the lion let out a low growl. A chill coursed down my spine. Rye was by my side in half a second, his hand on my wrists, pulling me back. But the growl wasn't for me. I closed my eyes and lowered the shields around my mind, sending my senses out.
I couldn't feel them exactly, but I felt a heavy, dark feeling, like a thick fog spreading fast and enveloping everything in its way.
"They are coming this way,"
Rye said, probably sensing the same thing I was. I looked up at him. Damn the lion. "Let's go." The moment we spun toward the truck, the barn's front gates blew open with a loud bang and the alchemists poured in. I counted 6, but in the dark and with how fast they moved, I couldn't be sure. Pale and cradling his broken arm, Wesh retreated to the back of the building. Hansi jumped forward and threw his arms out, sending a powerful rush of air over the alchemists. The strong wind blew them back a few paces. I channeled my power and stomped on the ground. A wall of stones rose from floor to ceiling, sealing the alchemists behind it. "Go!" I shouted. The 4 of us ran to the truck. Hansi helped Wesh into the back, and Rye opened the driver's door. Then 2 alchemists jumped down from the roof, one right in front of Rye, the other right in front of me. With his shadow dagger out and his feet apart, the alchemist was ready to attack. I imagined him snarling at me under his mask. I reached for my sword, but the alchemist moved, swiping his dagger at me. I ducked, calling my power. Little stones rose from the ground. They pelleted him like bullets. Then I pulled out my sword, but before I could kill him, the white lion jumped from behind me, landing right on the alchemist's chest. Both of them went down. The alchemist screamed, and blood seeped into the ground. Eyes wide, I stared as the lion discarded the alchemists and turned his big head to me, as if killing an alchemist by tearing his neck open was a regular occurrence. I averted my eyes from the gore and saw as Rye pulled his sword from the other alchemist's chest. He immediately spun toward me and reached for me.
"Are you okay?"
Still in shock, I nodded. He grabbed my hand and squeezed once.
"We should leave."
Not trusting my voice, I nodded again. He opened the truck's passenger door for me, but I stayed in place, watching as the lion sauntered to the back of the truck. With blood smeared all over his muzzle, the lion hopped inside and the door closed behind him. What a bipolar lion. Rye touched my arm, and I focused on the problem at hand. We had to leave. Holding on to the doorway, I hauled myself into the truck while Rye ran to the other side and took the driver's seat. Without turning on the lights, he backed the truck onto the back road. We saw as the alchemists crawled up the roof, coming for us. Rye turned the truck around and stepped on it. When I was sure the alchemists couldn't reach us on foot, I fished my phone from my pocket and checked for messages. Nothing. I sent a couple of texts to my brother and my father and my mother, asking for updates. My heart hammered as I continued staring at the screen, hoping for an answer. Hansi rolled down the window dividing the front and back of the truck.
"I'm trying to call my dot and he doesn't answer," he said. "Any luck here?" "I haven't tried yet,"
Rye said. His eyes were on the road, but I could see the way his hands wrapped around the wheel and the tension in his shoulders. "They aren't answering me either," I whispered, afraid of voicing it. Head lowered, Hansi stayed seated behind the window, and when I glanced back, I saw Wesh seated farther away, his back against one of the empty cages. We remained in silence for a while. 5 minutes later, we were off the property. Not being able to get a hold of anyone, I tried calling my brother's phone. It rang and rang, but he didn't answer. My chest hurting, I lowered the window and glanced back. I squinted, not quite understanding what was on the horizon. Then I gasped as the tiny orange flecks grew and gray smoke rose to the dark sky. Fire! I yelled. Startled, Rye jerked the truck.
What?
The Enclave! It's burning, I said, my voice breaking. Hansi ran back and opened one of the truck's doors. He fell on his knees.
No!
I twisted toward Rye. They are in trouble. We have to go back. Rye's knuckles turned white around the wheel, and he shook his head once.
No. We have a mission, and we'll stick to it.
Our family is back there, and you want to stick to the damn mission? He shot me a glare before looking at the road again.
For all we know, our family made it out. That's just a consequence of the battle.
You don't know that.
Neither do you.
Groaning, I moved to the window and looked back again. The fire spread, fast and relentless. Please, Saint Sarah Luckily, let my family, all of our families, make it out. A loud boom rang around us, shaking the truck. Rye slammed on the brakes, and we jumped out of the truck. The four of us stood at the end of the truck, watching as the fire rose and rose and rose into the sky, swallowing our enclave whole. Chapter 6. Despite all my screams and shouts and the punches I landed on his shoulders, Rye didn't stop the truck again. He didn't turn it around. In fact, he only sped up and took us farther from the Enclave. Hansi and Wesh agreed with him, though we all continued calling and texting and hoping someone would contact us to let us know they were okay, that they made it out before the alchemists burned our home to the ground. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The black night stained orange by the flames that shot to the sky. A heavy mix of emotions made its way up my chest and choked me. I wiped away the tears before someone noticed I was crying. Until we knew for certain, no, until we received news from someone at the Enclave, I wouldn't be weak. And when someone did call us, I would cry in relief. Those were the only tears I would allow myself. Because there was no other option. I wouldn't even think of other options. Finally, after another 200 miles or so, most of them on smaller roads in the middle of nowhere, we passed what looked like an abandoned gas station, and Rye parked the truck behind a line of thick trees just off a back road. My legs and heart restless, I jumped out of the truck before it had fully come to a stop. Hansi opened the truck's back door and jumped out.
"What now?"
he asked. Groaning and holding his broken arm, Wesh sat down on the edge of the truck.
"I say we keep going."
Wesh's face was still pale, save from the few dark red wounds spread across his neck. Poor guy. He had just lost his brother, and now we couldn't contact our Enclave. I understood why he wanted to keep going.
"Besides, we need to take these animals to the sanctuary before we do anything."
Rye appeared from the other side of the truck. His eyes narrowed, and his arms and neck were tense. I had never seen him so stoic and fierce before. To be honest, I had never paid him much attention before. He stood tall, his arms crossed.
"I think, before going any farther, we need to find a way to confirm what happened."
"What do you mean?" I asked.
"We can't drive aimlessly," he said.
"We're not aimless," Hansi said.
"We're going to the sanctuary, right?" "Yes, but what about after?"
"We go back home," I said, defiant. Rye shook his head.
"We can't risk it. We can't risk going back there without knowing what happened, what is happening."
I groaned. "But we have to. We need to find out what is happening now."
We've been calling, Hansi said, lifting the cell phone in his hand. No one is answering.
Then we come up with a new plan. I lifted my chin and faced Rye, knowing he would be the one opposing me. You guys keep going, take the animals to the sanctuary, and I'll go back to check on everyone. I had no idea how I would go back by myself, but I would find a way. Rye shook his head before I finished talking.
No way,
he said, his words harsh.
I won't let you go out there alone.
I'll be careful. Rye took a step toward me.
What if it's not safe? What if they know some of us escaped and they are waiting for us to go back and fall into their trap?
I threw my hands down. We can't just stay here and wait. Our families aren't answering. They might be in trouble and we can help.
It's probably too late, Wesh said, his voice low and utterly calm.
I flinched at his words. What? Why do you say that? He turned his gray eyes to me, and I suppressed another flinch at the coldness reflecting in them.
Think. Dozens of alchemists invaded our home when we were all sleeping. They got past our wards and warriors, and they attacked our home. You saw the fire, the explosion, and no one is answering our calls. Don't you think that if someone else had escaped, they would have contacted us by now?
He snorted, and I realized he had given up. He had no hope for our people.
And you know what alchemists do with Ziganes. They rounded everyone up and are now harvesting our family and friends.
Shut up, I shouted, clenching my fists.
Dude,
Hansi snapped, clearly aggravated.
Wesh shrugged. It's the truth, and you know it.
Rage made its way up my chest, and my hands trembled, itching to claw Wesh's eyes out. Instead, I spun around and marched to the edge of the road. I opened my hands, and rocks flew from the ground down the road, going as far as I could see. I kept throwing rocks, using my magic, spending its energy, letting out the anger floating in my veins. Finally, my shoulders sagged, and a single tear rolled down my cheek. I looked down the road to where the dark blue sky was slowly turning a dark orange on the horizon as the sun rose. We had been on the road for hours, and no one had called us. Still not ready to give up hope, I fished my cell phone from my pocket and tried it again. My father, my mother, Marco, the Rumbaro, Roma, some of the elders. I called everyone I had in my contacts. No one picked up. I sensed his steps on the rough ground before I heard them. Moments later, Rye halted by my side. If you're here to tell me Wesh is right, don't waste your breath. From the corner of my eyes, I saw his chest moving up and down as he took a deep breath and let it out again. I won't give up. Not yet.
I know, and that's a good thing.
I snapped my head to him. I thought you agreed with Wesh. He pressed his lips tight.
I don't want to agree, but all the evidence we have so far points that way.
He turned just enough to face me.
But I don't want it to be true, and I think having you fight for a better outcome is what is giving me strength right now.
The sun chased away a bit more of the darkness, and that was when I saw. Rye's eyes shone with unshed tears. I was wallowing in my own despair and anger. I had forgotten they all must be suffering too. Even Wesh, who seemed uncaring. I'm barely holding on, I said in a low voice. I can't be someone else's strength. Rye reached for me and caught my hand in his.
Right now, I'm just glad you're here with me, where I can see you're safe and sound.
Another tear escaped. Rye lifted his free hand, and cupping my face, he brushed my tear away with his thumb.
Whatever happens, whatever happened, whatever comes out of this, we'll make it, okay? I'll make sure you make it.
Another bag of emotions seized my chest, and my throat closed. I lowered my head, and before I knew it, Rye slid his arms behind my back and pulled me to his chest. I didn't resist. Instead, I buried my face in his warmth, inhaling deeply, wishing his woodsy male scent would overshadow my fear, my anger, my frustration. I clutched the side of his shirt and allowed a few more tears to fall. His big hands rubbed up and down my back, soothing some of my pain, calming me in a way I didn't expect. Rye dipped his head down, resting his chin on my temple. He hummed a tune all Zeganes knew, a children's nursery rhyme about going to sleep safe from revenants and dragons and other supernatural creatures that were our enemies, including alchemists. I focused on the melody and forgot the lyrics. Soon, the tears stopped, but Rye continued rubbing his hands up and down my back, and we were swaying side by side. When had we started? Probably tired from the same rhythm, Rye started humming another lullaby. Sniffing, I pulled back and looked up at him. "Are you trying to put me to sleep?" He shifted his face to meet my eyes, and I sucked in a sharp breath. His full lips were only a couple of inches from mine.
"If that helps, I'm game,"
he said, his voice low, coarse. His gaze flicked to my lips. My cell phone rang, and I jumped back, my heart going into overdrive. "By Saint Sarah Luckily," I muttered, reaching for my phone. It was a call, a call. It was them, my family, I knew it. But as I glanced at the screen, confusion replaced the excitement. "I don't know this number," I said.
"Just answer it,"
Rye said.
"Do it,"
Hansi shouted from the distance. He helped Wesh down from the truck, and both of them rushed toward us. I pressed the green button and answered the call. "Hello?"
"Cora?"
a strange voice said. My stomach dropped. "Yes? Who is it?"
"I'm Theron, from the Belleville Enclave in Connecticut."
I had forgotten all about Belleville and the contact my father had sent me. "Yes, he gave me your number. He said to call you if we needed help."
"Well, he called me last night," he said. "He asked for help."
My heart sank.
"We've been on the road since, but we've been trying to call him and no one answers."
A sob rose and lodged at my throat. "I know. I can't get a hold of him or anyone else." Holding back more tears, I explained to Theron all I knew, all I had seen.
"All right," Theron said. "Give me a moment."
I heard a few muffled voices as he told someone else what had happened.
"Okay. I've talked to my people here, and we'll keep the original plan. We're going to your enclave to see what we can find out."
I wanted to shout, beg him to take me with them. Instead, I let out a long breath to calm myself. "We thought about going back, but some of us think the alchemists could be waiting."
"They are right,"
Theron said.
"But they won't expect us. Don't worry. They won't see us coming,"
he said, sounding confident. I balled my hand into a tight fist. "Well, if you meet the alchemists, skin them alive, please." A hollow chuckle came from the other side of the line.
"Will do. Meanwhile, you should keep going to the sanctuary. The sooner those animals are there, the better.
I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That's the plan. I paused. Please, keep me posted.
Will do,
He said, before ending the call. Hansi's eyes were huge.
So?
I shrugged and glanced at Rye. I want to turn around and meet them at the Enclave, but I know some of us, Rye raised one of his eyebrows, won't want that.
You're damn right, Rye muttered. So, to the sanctuary?
Hansi asked. I let out a defeated sigh. To the sanctuary. Chapter 7. The idea was for us to keep driving until nighttime. Find a quiet inn in the middle of some town where we could hide better than the roadside ones, and rest. But it was just past noon, and we couldn't take it anymore. We had slept only a couple of hours last night before the screaming and the running started. We had fought and ran, and the tension and fear clutching our bones and muscles brought on exhaustion faster. Because of that, we agreed to stop at the only inn in a tiny rural town around 2 p.m. We rented one room with 2 queen beds so we could sleep for a couple of hours, but decided once the sun set we would be back on the road. However, as we entered the small room and I took in the 2 beds, something like panic weighed down my chest. Hansi helped Wesh to one of the beds.
Wake me up tomorrow,
Hansi joked, settling down on the bed beside Wesh. I stared at the remaining bed. I understood why we shouldn't have more than one room, but sharing a bed with Rye? I couldn't think of that. Rye halted beside me. I jerked as if he had shocked me. It's been a while since we ate. I retreated to the door. I saw a diner 2 blocks from here. I'll pick up some stuff for us. I left the room before he could say anything. The town was strange. Even downtown was spread out, and the blocks were long and full of trees and bushes. It was as if whoever built the inn hated the diner's owners, and whoever owned the grocery store had a problem with the only gas station in town. There were only a dozen houses, and even those had huge lots, as if they all needed space from one another. The walk, though, was good. I took several lungfuls of fresh air and stretched my legs after being in the truck for so long. The diner was deserted, and no one seemed to pay attention to my combat clothing, my leather pants and vest and heavy boots. At least I had left my sword back in the truck. I ordered some burgers and hot dogs and fries and other stuff I thought the guys would like, then started my trek back to the inn. I gazed at the cemetery, located halfway from the diner to the inn. Behind it was a church looking as run down as the rest of the town. If there weren't someone at the front desk at the inn and a cook and waitress at the diner, I would have thought this town was abandoned. Something tugged in the back of my mind, and I sent my senses out. The heavy, dark feeling was here. I almost tripped on my own feet, but I kept going, my expression and movements neutral. The feeling was coming from the cemetery and from behind me. It was following me and getting close. Swallowing my panic, I pulled out my phone, and like a gajo would do, I pretended to check Facebook or Instagram, only I sent a text to Hansi. Me. On the road to the diner. Alchemists. I hurried my steps a little, not enough to be noticeable, and prayed for Hansi to see my text. He was in bed when I left, ready for a nap. I had the impression Rye wouldn't rest until I came back, but I didn't have his number. I kept my senses out, checking on the heavy feeling that advanced more and more. The inn came into view, still too far away, but in sight. My will to run made me tense, but I held on until the heavy, dark cloud exploded behind me. 5 alchemists ran after me. With a yelp, I ran. The alchemists advanced fast, gaining on me. I didn't like using my magic in public, but what the hell, this town was deserted, and if someone saw us, we could deal with it later. I channeled my power and erected a wall right behind me, 10 feet tall and as wide as the road. It wouldn't stop the alchemists, but it would slow them down, giving me enough time to get to the inn. I hoped. "Cora!" I heard Rise shout before I saw him running toward me. I waved him down. "Run!" I shouted back. "To the truck!" He halted, his hand extended to me. As soon as I was in range, I slid my hand into his, and then we flew. Rai ran a lot faster than I did. "Hansi is getting the truck," he said as he pulled me behind him. I dared a glance back. The alchemists had climbed the wall, or gone around it, and were coming toward us. "Shit," I muttered. Rai squeezed my hand. "We'll make it." Tires squealing, the truck appeared from behind the inn, turning a sharp corner. For a moment I thought it would roll over. My heart stuttered, but then the truck straightened, coming fast at us. Hansi stopped the truck right beside us, and Wesh opened the back doors. "Come on!" Wesh yelled, good hand extended to us. In a couple of steps, Rai and I reached the truck, and the alchemists caught up with us. Hansi jumped from the front of the truck and sent a rush of wind toward the alchemists. They stumbled back just enough to give us a moment to pull out our swords. Face pale, Wesh retreated inside the truck. After all he had seen with his brother, I didn't blame him. Besides, he was hurt. He would only make things worse. Shadow daggers in their hands, the alchemists came at us. Rai and Hansi engaged in a fight, and I stayed back. My power running like electricity in my veins, I stomped my foot on the ground and the earth jutted out, breaking through the cement and pulling it back, creating cracks in the road. I kept it coming, the cement breaking apart wider and wider, putting more distance between the alchemists and us. One of them leered at me from across the gap. He fished a vial from his pocket and threw it at me. I jumped back as yellow powder spread in the air like fog. Coughing, I backed up more, right into the arms of another alchemist. "Got you," he whispered, his voice muffled because of the thick mask covering the lower part of his face. The strong man pressed the shadow dagger to my neck. Just its touch stung, and I recoiled. I called on the earth. Like a massive wave, the ground exploded from the nearest gap. I closed my eyes, and all I felt was a gentle caress on my face, while the earth, strong and raging, assaulted the alchemist behind me. The earth carried him back, just like a real 20-foot-tall ocean wave would do. The alchemist fell on his back, choking on the earth. I scrunched my nose. I wanted them all dead, yes, but I hated suffering. I raised my sword and plunged it into the alchemist's heart. The man jerked once more before going limp. A hand landed on my shoulder, and I spun fast, sword raised. "Hey!" Rai stepped back, palms out in peace. "It's me." I lowered my sword. "Sorry." I glanced around. The 5 alchemists were down, and none of us seemed hurt. "We should go," Rai said. "We don't know if there are more." "Sure," I muttered. I moved my fingers, and the earth rushed back into place. Then I let go of my magic, and exhaustion fell over me like a heavy blanket. I felt numb on the inside, numb and tired and cold.
I felt like I was swimming in a dark sea and didn't know where land was. So I kept swimming. I kept going, hoping I was heading in the right direction. But deep in my gut, I knew it was only a matter of time before I drowned. Chapter 8. The road was quiet, save for the pickup right in front of us and Rye's loud breathing from the passenger seat. I stole a glance at him, but this late at night I barely saw the shape of his face. But I could hear his breathing, and if I reached over just a few inches, my arm would brush his. I had never had problems with quiet and darkness and loneliness until the alchemists had invaded our enclave and attacked the people we loved. Now, the thought that we could be all alone in this world made me sick to my stomach. Tears burned the back of my eyes, and I blinked fast, focusing on the truck in front of me. I also had never been a crier. In fact, I could count on one hand the times I had cried during my teenage years. I sighed. Now I was a huge mess with a ticking bomb on my back. Any more bad news and I would explode. I knew it. I was sick of feeling this weak, this vulnerable, this unstable. Having fought those alchemists earlier today had helped because we had kicked their asses, but it still wasn't enough. It would never be. Not unless I could go home and kick their asses there before it all went to hell and everyone went MIA. A loud exhale pushed through my lips, and I shifted in my seat, trying to keep myself alert. I was tired. We were all tired. Tired of worrying, tired of fighting, tired of running. I glanced at Rye again. He had inclined the back of his seat a tiny bit, and he had laid back, his head high and his arms crossed. If it were me, I would have been leaning on the window in an awkward position, and when I woke up, my back and neck would be killing me. As rigid as a statue, Rye was the vision of strength and endurance and composure. If it weren't for the up and down of his chest, I would have thought he too was dead. A ball surged up in my throat and I almost cried out. No one was dead. We didn't know that. Not yet. And all I could do right now was to hang on to hope. I forced my focus back on the road and the pickup ahead of us. After our last encounter with the alchemists, we decided our big truck was too visible and easy to track and slow. So we found an impound lot and borrowed 2 pickups. One had a hard cover, so we put the smaller animals there, and one had a tall canopy where the bigger animals went. Rye and I had switched places a couple of hours ago, but in the other car, Hansi drove because of Wesh's arm. We had talked to him about stopping hours ago, but he wouldn't have it. The more distance we put between the place of the last attack and us, the better. He assured us he would let us know if he got too tired to continue. However, it was past midnight. I would give him 1 more hour, and then I would call it a night. My phone rang, and Rye shot up, his hand flying to the sword at his feet. My arm shot out before he hit his head on the dashboard. "Calm down, big guy," I said, going for a lighter note, but failing. Nothing about our situation felt light. Rye dragged his hands down his face, shaking the sleep from his eyes, and I reached for my phone on the center console. A quick peek at the screen let me know who it was. My heart sped up. "Theron?" I answered. "Cora, hi," he said, his voice low, stiff. "What happened?" I have to tell you something." I slammed my foot on the brakes, stopping in the middle of the road a few seconds later.
What?
I just left your enclave.
I put a shaking hand over my heart. And? In front of us, Hansi noticed I had stopped, and stopped too.
There's nothing there, Cora. There's no one.
I turned to Rye, fixing my eyes on his. What do you mean?
I found ruins. Almost every building destroyed by fire. Lots of rubble and broken weapons and blood. But nothing else. No person alive. No person dead.
I closed my eyes for a second and shook my head. I don't understand.
There are no bodies at your enclave, Cora. Dead or alive, the alchemists took everyone.
I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. With jerky movements, I pushed the truck's door open and ran.
Cora,
Rye called after me. A moment later, Hansi shouted my name. But I kept running and running and running. I ran into the forest and away from everything and everyone. My boots weren't ideal for running, and soon my legs and feet were hurting, but I kept pushing. I kept going. Just running. Just running. Then I tripped on something and fell on the dried grass, my hands and knees first, followed by my elbows. Exhaustion and grief seeped into my bones, and I lowered my head and body to the cold ground. I lay there as tears fought and fought and fought against my will and strength, and finally won. It couldn't be. I didn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't. Marco and Duke had been there. They were our best warriors. My father and my uncle were older, but they had made fine warriors in their younger days. They could kick some alchemist ass if needed. And it hadn't been enough. The pain sliced through me. I rolled onto my back and let out a roar, screaming to the sky and Saint Sarah Lockelee and whoever else was listening. Why? By Saint Sarah Lockelee. Why? The scream went on and on until my throat felt raw and I was out of breath. But once it was done, I felt empty. Truly empty. Eyes wide, I lay on the cold grass like I was part of the forest.
Cora.
His voice was a gentle whisper carried by the soft breeze. I ignored it. Rye sat down on the grass beside me. I braced myself, expecting him to speak, to say something, to try to comfort me. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed there, right by my side, like a strong pillar. How he was still standing strong, I didn't understand. Finally, after a long while, he spoke.
I talked to Theron.
His voice was soft, low, tired, hurt.
We agreed to meet halfway to the sanctuary. He'll help us take the animals there.
I sat up and gaped at him. That's what you're worried about right now? He looked up to the dark sky.
That's the only thing we have left.
He lowered his eyes to me.
That, and
don't you dare finish that sentence, I said through gritted teeth. He let out a long sigh.
It's all we can do,
he continued. No, I cried, the rage and pain and frustration taking hold of me. It's not. I scooted to my knees and faced him, hoping he would understand, he would agree. We have to go there. We have to go back. There has to be some clue we can follow, and we can,
Cora,
track them down. There were too many Ziganes. The alchemists couldn't possibly... I snapped my mouth shut because I could not say it, not out loud. There has to be someone still alive, I whispered. Rye's hand cupped my cheek.
Cora, You know how it works. There's no one alive.
I slapped his hand away. No, I won't accept that. I can't accept that. I poked his hard shoulder. And what's making this more insane right now is how you're just accepting it.
Because I know.
No, you don't know. I poked him again. And if you did, you wouldn't behave like an emotionless mummy right now. I pushed his arm harder. Rage, scream, punch a tree, do something, show some emotion. I raised my hand to slap him. Rye closed his hand around my wrist, stopping my attack by a mere inch.
You don't want to do that.
Yes, I do, I cried. I do.
Cora.
Stop saying my name as if that was enough. A sob pushed up, but I swallowed it, and its weight added more pressure, more pain to my chest. I want you to scream. I want you to shout. I want you to hit something. Hit me. Fight me. Overcome by grief, I launched myself over Rye. He easily caught my shoulders and twisted us around. My back hit the ground hard, and Rye hovered over me, his hands and legs pinning me down. More red rage flooded my sight. Let me go.
After you calm down.
I won't calm down. I can't. Another sob rose, and this time I didn't have any strength to fight it. It ripped through me, bringing more pain, more darkness. I want to open my eyes and wake up from this nightmare, I whispered as my eyes filled with tears. I want to forget. I lay my hands flat on the ground and felt it. I felt the earth beneath the grass, so calm and strong and alive. All the things I wasn't at the moment. I also felt Rye over me, also solid and big and hard. His thighs pressed against mine, holding me down, and I suddenly knew, I felt, how I could forget. I turned off my mind and acted. I twisted my arms, causing Rye to let them go. He planted his hands on the ground on either side of my head, just as I wanted him to. Then I arched my back off the grass, wound my arms around his neck, and pressed my lips to his. He inhaled sharply, and tension hardened the muscles of his arms and shoulders. Shocked, it took him a second, but then he moved his lips against mine. I let out a relieved sigh and melted into him. His lips were soft and warm and tasted like sin, a sin I wanted and needed. His arm wrapped around my back, and slowly he lowered me back to the ground, his chest pressed against mine. It was divine, his weight pushing me down, his lips ravaging mine, and his gentle touch, leaving trails of fire on my neck and shoulder, were a divine distraction. It was all I needed, and I was sure it could be even better. I arched my back into him, putting my hips in line with his, pressing myself right there. He groaned, but didn't stop kissing me. Didn't he get what I wanted? I would have to be more obvious. I slid my hands down his ripped abdomen to the waist of his pants, and under. In a flash, Rye was on his feet. I leaned up on my elbows. What the hell? He ran a hand over his face.
What the hell is right? What the hell did you think you were doing?
You were doing it too, you idiot.
I was caught off guard.
The frustration, the pain, the hurt, all fell to the back of my mind. All I felt now was rage and embarrassment. I pushed to my feet. So you ask for my hand, but you're furious about kissing me,
What? I'm not furious about kissing you. Believe me, I've been thinking about kissing you for a long time.
Then what's the problem?
You.
I crossed my arms. Excuse me?
You aren't into it. You were only kissing me so I would get lost in you, and I would make you forget. So for a few minutes, you would feel something other than the pain you're feeling.
I gulped. Shit. He ran a hand through his hair.
And I almost fell for it. Hell, I almost didn't care. I almost went for it anyway, because I wanted it. I wanted you. But it's not right. It won't be like that.
He faced me, his brows curled down.
If I ever kiss you again, it'll be because you really want it, not to serve as a distraction.
He turned around and stomped away. The moment he disappeared between the trees, pain cut through my chest again, bringing me to my knees. Saint Sarah Luckily, what had I done? I had acted like a slut, ready to hand over my virginity to him just like that. Thankfully, Rye had been a gentleman and stopped me before I could. And yet, if I were so relieved by his actions, why did I feel the sting of rejection underneath my skin? I pushed those thoughts and feelings away. This was not the moment to think about Rye and his kiss and his body and the way he felt over me. It had been wrong of me to try to disguise my real pain with him. A tear slid down my cheek. I was about to open up, to let the pain consume me and carry me, to allow myself to grieve and mourn, when Rye shouted from somewhere among the trees,
"Now let's go. We're wasting time here."
Chapter 9.
Are you sure this place is safe?
Hansi stepped to my side. We halted between our two pickups, looking out at the crappy diner across the deserted road. It looked dead, but the sign on the door said it was open. Arms crossed, Rye answered,
"We can't be sure anywhere is safe."
His voice was tight, his shoulders and neck still tense. In the end, after my breakdown and our moment, Rye was too pumped and didn't want to settle down. He wanted to keep driving, but he also wanted to give Hansi a break. Then Wesh stepped in, saying that as long as we kept going through these quiet back roads, he should be able to drive with only his right arm. After making him promise he would tell us if he got tired or if his arm hurt or if it was too uncomfortable, we resumed our trip. Rye assumed the truck's wheel, while I leaned back in the passenger seat, pretending I was able to rest and not notice how strung up he was. For the next few hours I tried to sleep, but nightmares kept pulling me out of my slumber. None of us talked about what happened to our Enclave. It was as if we were all choosing to ignore it, to forget it. It would be easier to focus on a mission than to accept what happened. I was relieved when Rye spotted the diner and decided we all needed some food and rest. Though we all knew we needed a place to sleep, I doubted we would end up going to another inn anytime soon. Besides, we need food, I said. We haven't eaten properly in I don't even know how long.
"Yeah, I'm starving,"
Wesh said. He rolled his good shoulder and neck, pushing the stiffness away.
"If we think it's not safe, we just order food and get going."
"We can't keep going non-stop," I said.
"Agreed," Rye said. "We need a proper rest." "And a shower," Hansi added.
I sighed, just thinking how great a hot shower sounded. Okay, so now we worry about eating, but after we are done, we look for a place to rest. Eyes on the diner, Rye nodded.
Hansi said, "I'm okay with that."
"Me too," Wesh added. 3 minutes later, we were sitting at a booth in the middle of the diner.
Wesh had scooted in with Hansi, leaving Rye to sit by my side. Stiff, I moved as far away from him as I could until my shoulder and my hips were digging into the cushioned wall. The waitress, a middle-aged lady with gray hair and too much makeup, handed us the menus. "Here you go, darlings." She smiled wide at the guys. "I'll go get you some coffee while you choose." She walked around the counter to the coffee machines.
"I want to eat so many things,"
Hansi said, his voice low, dreamy. "Then eat all the things," I said, eyeing the menu. Truth be told, I had lost my appetite once we had left home, but I knew I needed sustenance to keep going.
"I want pancakes and a side of scrambled eggs, please,"
Wesh said, looking at me. Then he stood.
"Restroom. Be right back."
He rounded a corner past the long counter and entered a small hallway where the restrooms were. I had barely looked over the menu when the waitress came back, but since we didn't want to waste time, I ordered the same as Wesh. The three of us remained silent while we waited for our food. There was nothing to talk about. Everyone was still processing the latest news, trying to swallow it. It wasn't easy. I didn't want to admit it, but this time I agreed with Rye. Better to focus on the mission than to dwell on what happened, and what we couldn't change. The waitress brought more coffee and our food. I glanced at the plates in front of Wesh's empty seat. I think he got lost on the way to the restroom. I cut a piece of my pancake and shoved it in my mouth. I almost moaned. By Saint Sarah Lockalee, the pancakes were either the best in the country or I was so hungry anything would have tasted like heaven. Rye swallowed a piece of his food before saying,
"He's taking a long time."
Hansi shrugged.
"Don't worry. He's probably taking a cat bath in the sink. I've seen him doing that before in the middle of training."
I scrunched my nose. That's just gross. Hansi chuckled, his mouth full. I tried relaxing, but I couldn't. Eyes flicking to the old ticking clock on the wall, I kept count of the minutes. After 15 minutes and our clean plates, I gave up being patient. "One of you go check on him before I do," I said. Rye started moving, but Hansi raised his hand.
"On it."
He stood and marched to the corner where the restrooms were. The tension around the table tightened the moment Hansi left.
"Cora,"
Rye started, turning his body toward me. I sucked in a sharp breath. Here he went, saying my name like a prayer. Why was it so easy for him to either make me angry or disarm me? I stared at a stain on the leather seat across the table. "Yes?"
"We should talk about what happened last night."
I snapped my head to him, hoping my expression was as neutral and unaffected as I wanted it to be. "There's nothing to talk about." Maybe there was, but I wasn't up to it. Like everything else, our moment last night was best if burned into ashes and thrown into the wind. Ignored. Forgotten.
"There is, Cora, and you know it."
He pressed his lips tight before continuing.
"You know how I feel about you. I asked for your hand. By Saint Sarah Lockalee, that should tell you something, and—"
"No, it doesn't." His eyes widened for a second.
"What?"
"As far as I know, your dot suggested you ask for my hand so you wouldn't be alone." His jaw ticked.
"I told you that. And I also told you that at first I ignored his suggestion, but then I started looking at you, seeing you."
"You might have only said that to make me feel better, so I wouldn't feel like it was me."
"You know it's not like that."
He reached for my hands, but I slid them under the table.
"Why are you doing this?"
Because it was easier. Because admitting I had started the kiss to distract myself, to change my anger into something else, but then I had enjoyed, liked, The way his lips closed around mine, the way his touch brought a fire within me, the way his body molded on top of mine. I suppressed a shiver. Admitting that wasn't an option. I had to be angry with someone, and he was right here, offering something for me to latch onto, to pour all my rage into. And that was precisely what I would do. Just drop it, okay? I grabbed my coffee and emptied my mug.
You think?
Rye stopped talking when Hansi rushed to our table, his eyes wide and his breathing accelerated.
He's not in the restroom,
Hansi spat. Rye shot to his feet, almost taking the table with him.
What? I checked the men's and women's restroom, and I opened the back door and looked out in case he needed some air and was just hanging out there, but he wasn't there either.
Rye fished his phone from his pocket while I scooted out of the booth, my wallet in hand. I grabbed some cash and threw it on the table. Phone pressed to his ear, Rye walked out of the diner. Hansi and I followed. "Come back soon," the old waitress shouted, her words muffled by the closing glass door. Hansi stepped in front of Rye, making him stop.
And?
Rye lowered the phone.
He's not answering.
My heart sank. We should look for him. Let's split up so we can cover more ground faster. Rye caught hold of my wrist, his hold firm but not tight.
We are not splitting up. We are stronger when fighting together.
I nodded, realizing he was right. Okay. We looked around. The thoughts in my mind ran a mile per second, and I bet Rye's and Hansi's minds weren't much better. Where was Wesh? Where could he have gone?
What do we do?
Hansi asked, voice low.
I don't know,
Rye said, looking down at his phone. He started a new call, trying Wesh's phone again. Maybe we go back to the trucks and make sure the animals are okay, I suggested. If something had happened to Wesh, if alchemists were here, then the animals weren't safe either. Hansi started moving right away, jogging to where we had parked the pickups across the road. Rye and I caught up with him halfway, and the three of us came to a sudden halt the moment we crossed the thick line of trees.
What the?
Hansi muttered. There was only one pickup in front of us. Its bed was open, and all the animals were gone, except for the white lion, who was lying on the ground beside the pickup as if he was resting before resuming the trip. The sun peeked out from the trees, making his white coat shimmer. The pickup is gone, I said. Maybe hearing the words would make more sense.
I see that,
Rye said, his tone harsh. I groaned. Why is the damn pickup gone? Hansi started pacing in front of us.
It was the alchemists. That's the only explanation.
He muttered some intelligible words.
They've been following since we left the Enclave. They caught up with us again.
But they could just have taken the trucks and left us here, I said.
And I think they wouldn't leave us here, Rye said. 4Z Gaines alone in the middle of nowhere. If they had enough numbers, they could have taken us.
I heard the two at the end of his sentence, even if he didn't say it.
Maybe Wesh heard something and went out the back to check. He saw the alchemists and they got him.
Hansi stopped pacing and faced us.
I don't know. All I know is it happened a few minutes ago. I say we go after him, try to find him before it's too late. I see tire tracks.
Rye pointed to the dirt road behind us.
They lead to the main road.
Hansi jerked his chin to the pickup.
Then let's go.
We all took one step toward the remaining pickup, then stopped again. What about him? I asked.
We have to take him with us,
Rye said.
We have to trick him into getting back into the pickup, Hansi said. Cora, raise walls around him, creating only one path for him. If he tries to jump over or something, I'll blast him back with wind. Then I'll keep him back until we tie him up."
Rye nodded.
"Sounds like a good plan."
He glanced at me.
"Ready?"
I channeled my power. The earth beneath my feet came to life. "Ready." Chapter 10. A wall taller than Rye enclosed the white lion, curving around the pickup and opening at its back. Agitated, the lion followed it and jumped into the bed, but as Hansi had predicted, he tried escaping over the wall. A strong blast of wind knocked him back, but the lion was too strong. He kept pushing as if the tornado-strength winds were a mere breeze.
"Stay in there, damn it!"
Hansi shouted. I knew he couldn't sustain a wind like that for long. He was getting tired and would have to let go soon. Hoping I didn't hurt the lion too much, I moved my hand, lifting hundreds of small rocks from the ground. I flicked my hand forward and the rocks flew, hitting the lion like bullets, just not as strong as I would have done with an attacker. The rocks and the wind won, and the lion retreated into the closed bed of the pickup. Rye sprang into action. He ran to the pickup. I collapsed one part of the wall, creating steps for him. He climbed with ease and ducked under the hard cover to tie the lion. A roar echoed from the closed top. My heart dropped. "Rye!" Hansi lost hold of his wind. I ran to the pickup and almost fell when the lion shot from the pickup's bed. He jumped off, arching over me. It felt like we were in slow motion, the huge lion flying over my head. Then the lion hit the ground with grace and strength. He opened his big mouth and let out another roar that raised goosebumps on my skin. I channeled my power, ready to defend us. Instead, the lion sat down and looked at us.
"What is he doing?"
Hansi asked. "I don't know." A moan came from the pickup and my heart skipped a beat. "Rye!" I jumped into the pickup's bed and knelt beside Rye. He was sprawled over the bed, a hand over his face. "Rye, by Saint Sarah Lockelee!" I reached for his arm, afraid of pulling it off his head and seeing a giant bleeding gash. "What happened?" Slowly, Rye lowered his arm. There was no wound on his face or neck. "Are you hurt?" My hand hovered over his body, looking for injuries. "Did he scratch you? Bite you?" One corner of Rye's lips turned up.
"Careful."
He sat up, and suddenly, his face was a couple of inches away from mine.
"I might think you care."
I stared into his eyes, wanting to be mad at him for playing like that, but so relieved he was all right that the usual rage at our push-and-pull situation disappeared. "Careful," I whispered. I might already care. His arm shot out, and his hand cupped the back of my neck.
"Careful."
His voice was low and hoarse, and his breath washed over my lips, teasing them.
"I might kiss you."
Feeling bold, bolder than I had felt in a long time, I lifted my chin, erasing half the distance to his lips. Rye groaned, then tugged me to him. His lips brushed mine. A loud roar shook the pickup.
"Shit,"
Rye said, pulling back. I cleared my throat. "We should go." Rye slid his hand from my neck, down my shoulder, past my wrist. He gripped my hand.
"This isn't over, okay?"
He stared into my eyes.
"Okay."
I nodded. With a lopsided grin, Rye let go of my hand, then scooted off the pickup. He offered me his hand, but I rolled my eyes at him. Didn't he know me? I wasn't one to ask for help, not for things like that. Hansi stood a couple of feet from the pickup, facing the lion, who was now standing.
I think he's trying to tell us something, Hansi said.
What do you mean? I asked. The white lion walked in a circle and then halted, looking to the road, to where the pickup tracks led. I gasped. I think he's trying to show us where the pickup went.
We know where the pickup went.
Hansi pointed to the right side of the road.
It went that way.
No, I mean, once we get on the road, we won't know where the pickup went. The tracks will disappear. We won't have another clue unless we catch up with it somehow. But I think the lion has a way of tracking it. I think he wants to lead us to the pickup.
Rye cocked one eyebrow at me.
Why do you think that?
I shrugged. This lion has acted so strange since we rescued him. Everything he does is unusual. Maybe this is one of his powers.
It sounds crazy, Hansi said.
I almost rolled my eyes. Well, if you stop to think, Gaines would sound crazy to Gajos too, so... Hansi scrunched his nose.
You got a point.
Rye nodded.
I say we have nothing to lose. But what if he tries to run away?
Hansi asked. He hasn't so far, I said, reminding him. He has been helpful, actually. Hansi looked at the white lion with a frown between his brows.
Okay, let's do it then.
Still watching the lion, we jumped into the pickup, Rye behind the wheel, Hansi in the back seat, and me in the passenger seat. Rye turned the pickup slowly, avoiding the lion. When the vehicle was lined up with the dirt road, he gripped the wheel and waited.
I'm up for it, but I have to say, this is probably the craziest thing I have ever done.
I almost smiled at him. By saying that, you're inviting more crazy stuff to happen. The lion let out a low, long roar. He turned toward the road and ran.
Shit,
Rye cursed, stepping deep on the gas pedal. The lion flew down the dirt road and merged into the main road faster than any car could.
Damn, this cat is fast.
I shut off the part of my brain that kept asking me, what if a Gajo saw a white lion racing down the road? How would they explain it? Well, it wasn't my problem. Hopefully, they would dismiss it as a brief hallucination, daydreaming or something. The lion ran by the side of the road for over 50 miles before turning right onto a smaller, quieter road and going for another 20 miles. Then he entered a dirt road and went another 10 miles. Hansi leaned over the front seats.
I'm starting to wonder if this lion is trying to trick us. No. Look.
Rye pointed ahead. The lion slowed, as in the distance, the road opened up to what looked like an abandoned ranch house, with broken windows, doors hanging from rusty hinges, loose wooden boards, and missing shingles. The grass around it was overgrown, and the garden to the left had probably been beautiful in the past, but now it was full of dry, dead bushes and branches. Rye drove the pickup off the road and stopped behind some trees. We could still see parts of the house from here.
What is this place?
Rye asked. I'm not sure, but look. I pointed to the right side of the house. We could see the ends of several cars parked behind the house, and one of them was our pickup.
I knew it,
Hansi hissed.
Alchemists got Wesh.
Well, we didn't know that for sure, but who else could have kidnapped Wesh and the animals? Revenants, dragons, and other kinds of supernatural creatures weren't this organized, this rational. Hansi grabbed a sword from the floor of the pickup.
Let's get these bastards.
Wait, no, Rye said, turning back to face Hansi.
First we need a sneak peek. Before we barge in there, we need to know what's going on, how many there are, and more importantly, if Wesh is still alive.
I nodded. If he's alive, by Saint Sarah Lockelia, I hoped he was. He had to be. Then we need to be careful how we're going in so the alchemists don't use him against us.
Exactly, Rai said. Take your weapons just in case, but first we look, then we make a plan, okay?
Hansi let out an annoyed breath.
Okay.
Swords in hand, we exited the pickup. The lion circled us once, and then lay on the dry, grassy ground.
I don't get this cat, Rai muttered.
He's a mythical creature, I said. Like us. You can't get it. Hansi pushed between us.
Okay, I'm ready.
Like 3 wolves on the hunt, we advanced through the trees until we were close to the house. From our spot, we could see 2 masked men at the back of the house, shadow daggers in their hands. Alchemists.
2 so far, Rai said. There's probably a bunch more inside.
2 more alchemists walked by the window beside the front door, and another appeared in the window to the right. 5, I whispered.
Rai shook his head. There's more. We need to get closer and take a look inside.
They will see us, I said.
I can make it, Hansi said. I can use the wind and do it. They won't see me.
Rai looked from me to Hansi and dipped his chin once.
Do it, and please don't get caught.
Hansi smiled, a mischievous thing.
I won't.
And then he was off. With his wind propelling him, Hansi floated above the grass. In a blink, he was hovering over the rotten porch of the house. Hansi glued his back to the wall and leaned over the window. The shadow of an alchemist appeared near the glass. My insides squirmed before he walked by. Thankfully, Hansi was ready and hid in time. Using his magic, he moved from window to window, even the ones on the second floor, carefully spying inside. The only windows he didn't look through were the ones at the back of the house, where the alchemists serving as lookouts could have easily spotted him. In another flash, Hansi appeared at our side. His face was pale, his eyes wide.
What happened?
Rai asked, his hand tied around the hilt of his sword.
What did you see?
Hansi shook his head.
You won't believe me.
I rested my hand on his upper arm, a comforting gesture. Hansi, just tell us. He fixed his scared eyes on mine.
Wesh is okay, I guess. He's tied to a chair in the middle of an empty room at the back of the house.
Relief rushed through me. So he's alive. I smiled. He's okay.
There's more,
Hansi said. He glanced from me to Rai and back to me.
Nico is right beside Wesh.
Chapter 11. Hansi's news that Nico was still alive was unexpected but welcomed. The will to charge in there right then was overwhelming. I almost did, except for Rai and his voice of reason.
Wesh and Nico seemed unharmed.
For now, Hansi answered.
And the animals? In the basement. How many alchemists? At least 10, maybe more, since I couldn't look in all rooms.
They are waiting for us, I said with a small gasp. I hadn't expected this. For some reason, they kept Nico alive, and now they have Wesh, and they are luring us in there. What are they expecting? 3 more Ziganes? Hansi shrugged.
Maybe they know we could call for help and expect more Ziganes.
That didn't make any sense. Rai took a deep breath.
Even so, we need more arms if we planned on barging into the house. The 3 of us against 10 or more are not great odds.
I didn't like this, but it wasn't as if we had many options. You're right. We'll need them if we want to make sure we get Wesh and Nico and the animals out of there alive.
Exactly.
Rai lifted his phone.
We can start planning now, but we'll wait for them."
So we did. For the next 3 hours, we took turns watching the house and resting, even though none of us could really relax knowing our friends could be killed at any moment. Finally, Theron and the cavalry arrived in a silver SUV.
"Hey there, I'm Theron, leader of the Belleville Warriors."
Theron shook Rye's hand first, then Hansi's and mine. He was a tall guy with long black hair and an easy smile.
"And these are my warriors, my brother Ramon, my cousin Jamie, and my friend Shay."
We greeted them and explained all that had happened since we rescued the animals in the forest, which was when we thought we had lost Nico. A heavy feeling grew in my stomach. These men had gone to our enclave. They had seen the destruction, the aftermath. They had told us no one from our enclave was alive, that no one had escaped. A sliver of jealousy snaked into my heart. I wanted to be the one to see it. Yes, I knew it would probably break me, but I would never have peace until I saw it with my own eyes.
"So what's the plan?" Ramon asked.
Rye explained the plan. Theron added a few insights and ideas, making the plan a little stronger. After checking we had enough weapons, we spread across the perimeter of the forest around the house. Though I wanted to be in the thick of the fight, being inside the house wouldn't help me with my earth elemental magic. So I asked to be in the back, preferably outside. That way I could take out whoever swarmed out or those in the outer rooms with my magic. I crouched down behind a bush and watched as 2 alchemists in the back talked amongst themselves. They were standing in the middle of the porch, but occasionally they each walked to the back corners of the house and looked out at the trees. Rye crouched beside me.
"Promise me you'll be careful."
I narrowed my eyes at him. "Of course I will." He reached for my hand and intertwined his fingers with mine.
"Promise me that if things look bad, you'll run."
I gaped at him. "What? Of course not." He squeezed my hand tight.
"Cora, if you get hurt, if we are captured, I can't deal with that."
A small, almost satisfied smile crested my lips. I cupped his face. "You know me. If you're all in trouble, I'm going to get in trouble too. I'll never leave anyone behind. Never again. Especially not you." He groaned before leaning closer and resting his forehead against mine.
"You're impossible. But I like you the way you are."
He brushed his lips on mine, tearing a pleased gasp from me.
"I'll see you after."
Then he was gone, leaving me hanging and wishing he had kissed me properly. He rushed to the side of the house with Theron and Ramon. Hansi, Jamie, and Shay were in the front, and I had the back. Not long after, the boom of an explosion shook the ground. It had come from the front. It was Hansi, Jamie, and Shay and their distraction. As expected, alchemists rushed to the front of the house, even the 2 guarding the back. Rye, Theron, and Ramon ran to the back door. I waited for them to enter the house, then, channeling my magic, I followed. I stopped by the back door. It opened to a kitchen where Ramon fought an alchemist. A low island divided the kitchen from the breakfast area, where Rye tangled with 2 alchemists, and behind him, Nico and Wesh were tied to wooden chairs in the middle of the empty room. Their mouths were muffled by ropes tied across their faces, but I could hear their grunts and desperate shouts. To the left, an archway led to what would have been a formal dining or living room, but now it was broken hardwood floor and peeling wallpaper, and Theron and 2 alchemists. Rapid footsteps rang above us. "There are more," I said, though I wasn't sure if the guys heard me. They were too enthralled in their fights.
I had seen a handful of alchemists going outside after the explosion, plus the 5 here and the ones upstairs. We had more than 10 alchemists, maybe way more. A door across the kitchen opened, revealing an alchemist. He had probably come from the basement. Narrowing his dark eyes at me, the alchemist extended his arm. The shadow dagger appeared in his hand. I didn't wait for him. I knelt, throwing my hands out. Hundreds of tiny rocks surged from the door, hitting him like an automatic rifle. He raised his hand, trying to protect himself from the onslaught. I kept the rocks coming hard and fast while I crawled to him. By the time he noticed what I was doing, it was too late. I had already grabbed my sword and aimed for his stomach. Hating this part, I sucked in a sharp breath and drove the sword into him. This was my 4th kill, and for some reason, it was still as hard and disturbing as the first one. Averting my eyes, I pulled the sword out. I tried not to look as his body fell back on the stairs with a heavy thud and rolled down to the lower level. Nausea revolved in my stomach. A groan caught my attention. I snapped my head to the right. Nico and Wesh widened their eyes at me. I rushed to them. "It's okay," I said. "I'm going to get you 2 out of here." With my sword, I cut the ropes around Wesh's wrists and ankles. He worked on the rope across his mouth, and I turned to Nico. "You have no idea how happy I am to see you." He groaned and grunted, his eyes still wide. "Calm down. I'll have you out in a second." Pain exploded behind my back, and I fell forward, landing on my hands and knees. Then a kick to my stomach took my breath away, and I rolled to my side, curling in pain. "What?" I tried to speak, but the pain was too great. I looked up, but all I saw was a hazy Wesh leaning over me. "You're ruining it." Wesh spat on the floor beside me. "Stop it before you ruin it all." He grabbed my sword from the floor. Gasping, I tried to move, to roll away, to kick up and defend myself. But to my surprise, Wesh turned to Nico and started cutting the ropes from the chair. "They were going to let us go," he muttered while fighting against the ropes. Having an arm in a temporary cast wasn't helping. "That was the deal." I blinked, but the haze only faded. "What are you talking about?" He grunted. "That day we were rescuing the animals. The alchemists were losing, and we would have killed them all, but a couple of them had Nico, and I couldn't let them kill my brother. I think they noticed how desperate I was. They offered me a deal. If I facilitated their entrance to our enclave, they would return Nico to me." I blinked again, and this time the haze was almost gone. "What?" Wesh glanced at me. Tears streamed down his face. "They promised they just wanted the animals. They wouldn't hurt anyone." He cursed under his breath. "I should have known. Nevertheless, they still had Nico, and I thought that if I brought the animals to them, they would let him go." Finally, Wesh cut Nico free. Nico ripped the rope from around his face and glared at his brother. "You're an idiot. I asked you not to do it. I knew they wouldn't honor the deal. I asked you not to do it, and you did anyway." "I had to," Wesh spat. "You're my brother. I couldn't let you die. And because of that, our entire enclave is dead." Nico's eyes glistened. "I hate you." Wesh reached for Nico. "No!" From the corner of my eyes, I saw 2 alchemists running at us. "Watch out!" I screamed, scrambling to my knees. Wesh turned, my sword in his hand, but he wasn't fast enough. The alchemist slapped my sword away. It went flying several feet away and pierced his shadow dagger into Wesh's chest. "No!" Nico shouted, while he dodged the second alchemist's attack. The first alchemist faced me. Shit. Groaning from the pain,
I rolled back on my shoulder, swiped my sword from the floor, and shot up to my feet just in time to parry the shadow dagger coming at my chest. I wasn't short, and this alchemist was a hulk of a man, an entire head taller than me. Each time I parried one of his attacks, my entire arm shook and hurt. I would have to win with speed and magic. I called the rocks lying on the floor near the basement stairs. They pelted him repeatedly. The man groaned and flinched, but didn't stop fighting. His movement became less smooth and fluid, though. I sidestepped his attack and swiped with my sword, cutting low on his side. The alchemist howled in anger. Enraged, he barreled toward me, all brute force and no technique. I stood my ground until the last moment. His hand scratched my shoulder as I rotated to the side and out of reach. Before he could recover, I dug my sword into his back. Fighting another round of nausea, I pulled out my sword and turned my face, not wanting to have to look at another body I killed longer than I needed. I turned around, expecting to have to dodge an incoming attack. Instead, I stared at Nico with a shadow dagger in his hand, cutting an alchemist's throat. He dropped the body and stared at me with wide eyes. Are you okay?" I asked. He let out a hollow chuckle.
"I'm not sure I should answer that right now."
Movement to my right had me recoiling, but it was Rye killing another alchemist. Then I saw that Hansi, Jamie, and Shay had come inside the house too, and were fighting more alchemists. "How many alchemists?" I asked. Rye shrugged. "I lost count some time ago." Footsteps echoed from upstairs. My eyes widened. "There are more?" Rye sighed.
"Apparently."
Rye, Nico, and I advanced to the front stairs as another set of alchemists ran down the steps. The fighting became a mess. With so many Ziganes and alchemists fighting inside the small house, we ended up bumping into each other, fighting the same opponent at the same time, and sometimes messing up more than helping. I ran my sword across the chest of an alchemist, and in a brief moment between opponents, I looked around. There were 8 of us, and too many alchemists to count. It was crazy. Where had they all been hiding? Was this some kind of trick? A new magic that kept cloning them? 1 went down and then 2 rose? It didn't make sense. As if my crazy idea was true, from across the room, an alchemist who had been quavering from his wounds on the floor pushed to his knees, and with his shadow dagger out, stood right behind Hansi. "No!" I screamed, as the alchemist pierced his dagger through Hansi's heart. Hansi's eyes met mine. They widened, and blood slid from his open mouth. Then he was on the floor. My control snapped, and rage flooded my senses. My sight went red. I channeled my power, calling on the earth beneath the house. The foundation shook. "Cora," Rye called me. "Get out," I snarled. "Get the animals and get out! Now!" Rye shouted for the others to follow him. The alchemist moved too, but I was ready. I lifted a hand, and several pillars of earth shot from the floor, ripping through the hardwood as if it were made of paper. The pillars crumbled and the earth spread. It accumulated around the alchemist's feet, holding them into place. The house shook harder. "Cora, we have to go." I thought it was Rye, but I was lost in my mind, in my rage, in my power. I didn't know who was talking. I didn't care. I moved my arms to the side, and earth and stones broke through the floor. They enclosed the alchemist's legs, the rocks and earth climbing high, creating their tombs. The walls cracked, the ceiling warped. The alchemist shouted and tried in vain to escape. A hand closed around my wrist and tugged hard. "Cora, come on!"
I flung all my power out. Earth poured from the floor like a geyser. Then my world tilted. I was upside down, staring at someone's back. A moment later, I was thrown to the ground. Rai stood right in front of me, but his body didn't hide the house behind him and the way it came down. Horror filled me as I watched the house as it became a flat expanse of debris. I had done that. I had reached the earth under the house's foundation, under the concrete basement. I had collapsed the house. I had killed all those alchemists. And Hansi's and Wesh's bodies were still in there. A sob ripped through me, but I swallowed it before it could escape. I glanced around. The animals were at the edges of the trees, including the white lion, and everyone else was watching the house. Nico, Theron, Ramon, Shay, and Jamie, except for Rai. Rai faced me, his eyes confused, worried, afraid. He was probably disgusted with me now, thinking I was a monster. By Saint Sarah Lockelee, what had I done? Chapter 12. I had lost everything. I glanced at Rai behind the SUV's wheel, then at Nico, who slept on the back seat, his side and head pressed to the door. We had lost everything. We had gone through a lot these past few days, and remembering the events brought a lump to my throat and tears to my eyes. But at least we had each other, Nico, Rai, and I. We had been from the same Enclave before, community members, warrior buddies, but now we were family, our own little family. Rai cast a side glance at me. What? I shrugged. Nothing. He returned his eyes to the road. He snaked his hand across the seat and laced his fingers with mine. Talk to me. I stared at our joined hands. When did this become something I was looking forward to? Something that meant I was safe and secure and happy. Well, maybe not fully happy. I didn't think I would ever be happy again, but appeased. Having Rai by my side grounded me, made me at peace. After rescuing Nico and the animals and losing Hansi and Wesh, Theron and his gang helped us haul all the animals to the back of the pickup. You guys have been through too much, Theron said, offering us the keys to his SUV. We'll take the animals to the sanctuary, and you go to Belleville. Our family will be waiting for you. We'll meet you there in a couple of days. We argued about it, of course, but there was no point. Theron was right. We had been through a lot. We had barely slept and eaten and taken showers in days, and we were so done. We accepted the trade. However, the damn white lion wouldn't go into the back of the truck and wouldn't even let anyone touch him. To our surprise, the moment Nico opened the back door of the SUV, the lion jumped in. The lion lay down in the third row, and nothing we did made him move. Theron assured us they had a place for the heart animals at their enclave. I glanced at the back through the rearview mirror. Only a patch of the lion's white mane was visible from here. He was either sleeping or lying around. I let out a sigh. All I want is a hot shower, hot food, and a warm bed. A low chuckle shook his chest. Me too. He spared me another glance. Are you okay, though? That was a tricky question. I shrugged again. Right at this moment, yes. I felt it, though. All the emotions,
All the rage, the fear, the sorrow, the pain, and the horror snaking their way in the back of my mind and chest, waiting for an opportunity to explode inside me and break me down for real. I tilted my head and narrowed my eyes at him. "Are you okay?"
"We'll all have some healing to do, but..."
One corner of his lips curled up. He lifted our joined hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to the top of my hand.
"You're with me, so I'm okay."
His words were cheesy, but they warmed my hurting heart. One thing that would always hurt, and I didn't think I would even understand, was how Wesh was able to sell us out so easily. I tried putting myself in his place. If the alchemists had Marco and offered me a deal, I would have wanted to take it. But I knew deep in my heart that Marco would have never forgiven me. And my father, if he had known, would make sure I didn't accept any deals from alchemists, even at the expense of his son's life. It all hurt. Another hour on the road, and we arrived at the address Theron had given us. Like he had said, the place looked like a friendly ranch. We were parking the SUV when 3 figures exited the main house. 2 middle-aged men and an older woman with a long gray braid. We exited the SUV and they walked up to us.
"Hello,"
one of the men said.
"I'm Neil, Belleville's Rumbaro. I believe you met my son Jamie."
He shook our hands, then he gestured to the man beside him.
"This is my brother Dolan. Theron and Ramon are his sons."
Dolan greeted us with the same warmth and strength.
"And this is our Doge, Sheila."
"Hello, dears," she said with a kind smile. "I bet you're tired and hungry. I've prepared supper for you. Come inside with us." She gestured for us to follow. "Wait," I said. We have a white lion in the back."
"Right," Dolan said. "Theron told us about that. I'll call one of the warriors to take and feed him."
After a quick dip of his chin, Dolan turned and walked into the house. "Now that that is solved," Sheila said. She gestured to the front door again. "Shall we?" After exchanging nervous glances with Rai and Nico, I followed her inside. The house was as bright and cozy on the inside as the outside. It was still Zigane Romney, with lots of beads and colorful patterns and yellow and light orange walls, but it had a more modern tone to it, with sleek furniture and lots of electronics. The smell of cinnamon and bread and apple flooded my nose moments before we emerged in the dining area, where a long table waited for us with lots of warm, yummy food. "Please sit down," Sheila said, gesturing to the table. Neil, Dolan, and Sheila joined us at the table. Rai sat beside me. This time, I was the one in need of touching him, to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I reached for his hand. He captured my fingers and squeezed tight. Smiling, Neil lifted a glass of orange juice and said,
"You don't have to worry and be afraid anymore. You're home now."
Sheila raised her coffee mug and offered a similar smile to us. "Welcome to Belleville." And for the first time in I didn't even know how many days, I allowed myself to relax and forget my problems. Because I was at my new home now. Home at Belleville with my new family. This has been Earthshaker by Juliana Haygert. Read for you by Candace Joice. Copyright 2018 by Juliana Haygert. Production copyright 2022 by Juliana Haygert. For more audiobooks, visit julianahaygert.com.